Hey guys, my name is Hayden, and this is my very first ASMR video. I've been listening and watching ASMR videos for a long time. It's probably 2010, I guess. I used to watch a lot of fish tank and fish videos, aquascaping and stuff. And there was one particular YouTuber that I used to watch all the time because her videos used to make me fall asleep. And I didn't know why, but it was just so relaxing, and I guess I got ASMR tingles from it before I knew what that was. And I ended up messaging her on YouTube and just saying, hey, like, I love your videos, and no offense, but they make me fall asleep because they're so relaxing. And she just said it's probably ASMR, and I didn't know what that was at the time, but I looked into it, and lo and behold, that's exactly what I was experiencing. And so from then I just started watching and listening to ASMR videos all the time. And I've been wanting to make an ASMR channel for a long time, probably as long as I've been watching ASMR, but just never got around to it. But I guess here we are, right? We're doing it now. So I thought that I would start off by reading a book, just maybe a few chapters, I suppose. Personally, I don't always love ASMR videos where people read, because I kind of like the more unscripted sort of style of ASMR. It just seems more, I think it gives me more tingles when it's real, you know, not scripted stuff. But even though it's not really scripted, it's just reading. But I like reading, and I know people like listening to other people read, so I thought, a good starting point would be just to jump right into it and do some reading. So let's get into it. The book we're reading is it's called The Alchemyst, and it is by Micheal Scott. It's the first installment of a series of books. I'll read the back of it. Nicholas Flamel was born in Paris in 1330. Legend has it that the alchemist discovered the secret of eternal life, and that his tomb lies empty. The legend is true. Nicholas has survived for almost 7 centuries thanks to the elixir of life. His secret lies within the pages of the Book of Abraham, the Mage. The secret that must be protected at all costs. In the wrong hands, the book would destroy the world, something that Dr. John Dee and the Dark Elders know only too well. Only 2 people have the power to stop him, the mythical twins of destiny. Alright. I am legend. Death has no claim over me. Illness cannot touch me. Look at me now, and it would be hard to put an age upon me. And yet I was born in the year of our Lord 1330, more than 670 years ago. I have been many things in my time: a physician and a cook, a bookseller and a soldier, a teacher of languages and chemistry, both an officer of the law and a thief. But before all these, I was an alchemist. I was the alchemist. I was acknowledged as the greatest alchemist of all, sought after by kings and princes, by emperors, and even the Pope himself. I could turn ordinary metal into gold. I could change common stones into precious jewels. More than this, I discovered the secret of eternal life, hidden deep in a book of ancient magic. Now my wife Penelope has been kidnapped, and the book stolen. Without the book, she and I will age. Within the full circle of the moon, we will wither and die. And if we die, then the evil we have so long fought against will triumph. The outer rays will reclaim this earth again, and they will wipe wipe humanity from the face of this planet, but I will not go down without a fight, for I am the immortal Nicholas Flamel. Thursday, 31st of May. Chapter 1. Okay, answer me this. Why would anyone want to wear an overcoat in San Francisco in the middle of summer? Sophie Newman pressed her fingers against the Bluetooth earpiece as she spoke. On the other side of the continent, her fashion-conscious friend Ellie inquired matter-of-factly, what sort of coat? Wiping her hands on the cloth tucked into her apron strings, Sophie moved out from behind the counter of the empty coffee shop and stepped up to the window. Watching men emerge from the car across the street, heavy black wool overcoats. They're even wearing black gloves and hats and sunglasses too. She pressed her face against the glass. Even for this city, that's just a little too weird. Maybe they're undertakers, Ellie suggested, her voice popping and clicking on the cell phone. Sophie could hear something loud and dismal playing in the background. Amorphous, maybe. Ellie had never quite gotten over her goth phase. Maybe, Sophie answered, sounding unconvinced. She'd been chatting on the phone with her friend when a few moments earlier she spotted the unusual-looking car. It was long and sleek, and it looked as if it belonged to an old black-and-white movie. As it drove past the window, sunlight reflected off the blacked-out windows, briefly illuminating the interior of the coffee shop in a warm yellow-gold light, blinding Sophie. Blinking away, the black spots dancing before her eyes, she watched as the car turned at the bottom of the hill and slowly returned. Without signaling, it pulled over directly in front of the small bookshop right across the street. Maybe they're mafia, Ellie suggested dramatically. My dad knows some of the mafia, but he drives a Prius, she added. This is most definitely not a Prius, Sophie said, looking again at the car and the two large men standing on the street, bundled up in their heavy overcoats, gloves and hats, their eyes hidden behind overlarge sunglasses. Maybe they're just cold, Ellie suggested. It doesn't get cold in San Francisco. Sophie Newman glanced at the clock and thermometer on the wall over the counter behind her. It's 2:15 here, and 81 degrees, she said. Trust me, they're not cold. They must be dying. Wait, she said, interrupting herself. Something's happening. The rear door opened and another man, even larger than the first two, climbed stiffly out of the car. As he closed the door, the sunlight briefly touched his face, and Sophie caught a glimpse of pale, unhealthy-looking grey-white skin. She adjusted the volume on the earpiece. Okay, you should see what just climbed out of the car. A huge guy with grey skin. Grey. That might explain it. Maybe they have some type of skin condition. I saw a National Geographic documentary about people who can't go out in the sun, Ellie began, but Sophie was no longer listening to her. A fourth figure stepped out of the car. He was a small, rather dapper-looking man, dressed in a neat charcoal grey three-piece suit that looked vaguely old-fashioned, but that she could tell had been tailor-made for him. His iron grey hair was pulled back from an angular face into a tight ponytail, while a neat triangular beard, mostly black but fleckled with grey, concealed his mouth and chin. He moved away from the car and stepped under the striped awning that covered the trays of the books outside the shop. When he picked up a brightly coloured paperback and turned it over in his hands, Sophie noticed that he was wearing grey gloves, a pearl button at the wrist winked in the light. They're going into the bookshop, she said. Is Josh still working there? Ellie immediately asked. Sophie ignored the sudden interest in her friend's voice. The fact that her best friend liked her twin brother was just a little too weird. Yeah, I'm going to call him to see what's up. I'll call you right back. She hung up. She pulled out the earpiece and absently rubbed her hot ears as she stared, fascinated, at the small man. There was something about him, something odd. Maybe he was a fashion designer, she thought, or a movie producer, or maybe maybe he was an author. She'd noticed that some authors liked to dress up in peculiar outfits. She'd give him a few minutes to get into the shop, and then she'd call her twin for a report. Sophie was about to turn away when the grey man suddenly spun around and seemed to stare directly at her. As he stood under the awning, his face was in shadow, and yet just for the briefest instant, his eyes looked as if they were glowing. Sophie knew, she just knew, there was no possible way for the grey man to see her. She was standing on the opposite side of the street behind a pane of glass that was bright with reflected early afternoon sun. She would be invisible in the gloom behind the glass, and yet that single moment when their eyes met, Sophie felt the tiny hairs on the back of her hands and along her forearms tingle, and she felt a puff of cold air touch the back of her neck. She rolled her shoulders, turning her head slightly from side to side, strands of her long blonde hair curling across her cheek. The contact lasted only a second before the small man looked away, but Sophie got the impression that he had looked directly at her. In the instant before the grey man and his three overdressed companions disappeared into the bookshop, Sophie decided that she did not like him at all. Peppermint and rotten eggs. That is just vile. Josh Newman stood in the centre of the bookstore cellar and breathed deeply. Where were those smells coming from? He looked around the shelves stacked high with books and wondered if something had crawled in behind them and died. What else would account for such a foul stink? The tiny cramped cellar always smelled dry and musty, the air heavy with the odours of parched curling paper mingled with the richer aroma of leather bindings and dusty cobwebs. He loved the smell. He always thought it was a warm, comforting, like the scents of cinnamon and spices that he associated with Christmas. Peppermint, sharp and clean. The smell cut through the closed cellar atmosphere. It was the odour of a new toothpaste, or those herbal teas his sister served in the coffee shop across the street. It sliced through the heavier smells of leather and paper, and was so strong it made his sinuses tingle. He felt as if he was going to sneeze at any moment. He quickly pulled out his iPod earbuds. Sneezing with the headphones on was not a good idea. It made your ears pop. Leaving the earbuds dangling over his shoulders, he checked the book list in his hand, then looked at the shelves again. The complete works of Charles Dickens, 27 volumes, red leather binding. Now where was he going to find that? Josh had been working in the bookshop for nearly 2 months and still didn't have the faintest idea where anything was. There was no filing system, or rather there was a system, but it was known only to Nick and Barry Fleming, the owners of the small bookshop. Nick or his wife could put their hands on any book in either of the shop upstairs or the cellar in a matter of minutes. A wave of peppermint immediately followed by rotten eggs filled the air again. Josh coughed and felt his eyes water. This was impossible. Stuffing the book list into one pocket of his jeans and the headphones into the other, he manoeuvred his way through the piled books and stacks of boxes, heading for the stairs. He couldn't spend another minute down there with the smell. He rubbed the heels of his palms against his eyes, which were now stinging furiously. Grabbing the stair rail, he pulled himself up. He needed a breath of fresh air or he was going to throw up, but strangely, the closer he came to the top of the stairs, the stronger the odours became. He popped his head out of the cellar door and looked around, and in that instant Josh Newman realised that the world would never be the same again. Chapter 2. Josh peered over the edge of the cellar, his eyes watering with the stink of the sulphur and mint. His first impression was that the usually quiet shop was crowded. 4 men facing Nick Fleming, the owner, 3 of them huge and hulking, 1 small and sinister looking. Josh immediately guessed that the shop was being robbed. His boss, Nick Fleming, stood in the middle of the bookshop, facing the others. He was a rather ordinary-looking man, average height and build, with no real distinguishing features except for his eyes. were so pale that they were almost completely colourless. His black hair was cropped close to his skull, and he had always seemed to have a stubble on his chin, as if he hadn't shaved for a couple of days. He was dressed as usual in simple black jeans and a loose black t-shirt, advertising a concert that had taken place 25 years earlier, and a pair of battered cowboy boots. There was a cheap digital watch on his left wrist and a heavy silver link bracelet on his right, alongside two daddy multicoloured friendship bracelets. Facing him was a small grey man in a smart suit. Josh realised that they were not speaking, and something was going on between them. Both men were standing still, their arms close to their bodies, elbows tucked in, open palms turned upward. Nick was in the centre of the shop while the grey man was standing close to the door, his three black-coated companions around him. Strangely, both the men's fingers were moving, twitching and dancing, as if they were furiously typing. Thumb brushed against forefinger, little finger touching thumb, index and little finger extended. Tendrils and wisps of green mist gathered in Fleming's palms, then curled in ornate patterns and drifted onto the floor. Foul yellow tinged smoke coiled and dripped from the grey man's gloved hands, spitting into the wooden floor like dirty liquid. The stench rolled off the smoke, thickening the atmosphere with the scent of peppermint and sulphur. Josh felt his stomach twist and lurch, and he swallowed hard. The rotten egg smell was enough to make him gag. The air between the two men shimmered with tendrils of green and yellow smoke, and when they touched, sparks hissed and sizzled. Fleming's fingers moved, and a long fist, a thick coil green of smoke appeared in the palm of his hand. He blew on it, a quick hissing breath, and it spun up into the air, twisting and untwisting. At head height between the two men, the grey man's short, stubby fingers tapped out their own rhythm, and a yellow ball of energy spun from his hands and bobbed away. It touched the coil of green smoke, which immediately wrapped around the ball. There was a sparking snap, and the invisible explosion blew both the men backward across the room, sending them crashing across tables of books. Light bulbs popped and fluorescence shattered, raining powdery glass onto the floor. Two of the windows exploded outward, and while another dozen of the small square panes shattered and spiderwebbed. Nick Fleming tumbled to the floor, close to the opening of the cellar, almost landing on top of Josh, who was standing frozen on the steps, wide-eyed with shock and horror. As Nick clambered to his feet, he pushed Josh back down the stairs. "Stay down, whatever happens, stay down," he hissed, his English touched with an indefinable accent. He straightened up as he turned, and Josh saw him turn his right palm upward, bringing it close to his face, and blew into it. Then he made a throwing motion towards the centre of the room, as if he were lobbing a ball. Josh craned his neck to follow the movement, but there was nothing to see, and then it was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. Books were suddenly ripped from the nearby shelves, drawn into an untidy heap on the centre of the floor. Framed prints were dragged from the walls. A heavy woolen rug curled upward and was sucked into the centre of the room. Then the heap exploded. Two of the big men in black overcoats caught the full force of the explosion. Josh watched as books, some heavy and hard, others soft and sharp, flew around them like angry birds. He winced in sympathy as one man took the full force of a dictionary to the face. It knocked away his hat and sunglasses, revealing dead-looking, muddy grey skin and eyes like polished black stones. A shelf of romance novels battered against his companion's face, snapping the cheap sunglasses in two. Josh discovered that he too had eyes that looked like stones. And he suddenly realised that they were stones. He was turning to Nick Fleming, a question forming in his lips when his boss glanced at him. "Stay down," he commanded. "He's brought columns." Fleming ducked as the grey man sent three long spear-like blades of yellow energy across the room. They sliced through bookshelves and stabbed into the wooden floor. Everything they touched immediately started to rot rot and putrefy. Leather bindings snapped and cracked, paper blackened, wooden floorboards and shelves turned dry and powdery. Fleming tossed another invisible ball into the corner of the room. Josh Newman followed the motion of his boss's arm as the unseen ball sailed through the air and a shaft of sunlight caught it, and for an instant he saw the glow of green, faceted like an emerald globe. Then it moved out of the sunlight and vanished. This time, when it hit the floor, the effect was even more dramatic. There was no sound, but the entire building shook. Tables of cheap paper bags dissolved into matchwood, and slivers of paper filled the air with a bizarre, bizarre confetti. Two of the men in black, the columns, were slammed back against the shelves, bringing books tumbling down on top of them, while a third, the biggest, was pushed so hard against the door that he was propelled out onto the street. And in the silence that followed came the sound of gloved hands clapping. "You have perfected that technique, I see, Nicholas." The grey man spoke English with a curious lilt. I don't know what that word is. "I've been practicing, John," Nick Fleming said, sliding towards the door, shoving Josh Newman further down the stairs. "I knew you would catch up with me sooner or later. We've been looking for you for a very long time, Nicholas. You've got something of ours and we want it back." A sliver of yellow smoke bit into the ceiling above Fleming and Josh's head. Bubbling rotten black plaster drifted down like bitter snowflakes. "I burned it," Fleming said. "I burned it a long time ago." He pushed Josh even further down into the cellar, and then pulled the sliding door closed, sealing them both in. "Don't ask," he warned, his pale eyes shining in the gloom. "Not now." Catching Josh by the arm, Nick pulled him into the darkest corner of the bookstore cellar. There was a click, and the shelving swung outward, revealing a set of steps hidden behind it. Fleming urged Josh forward into the gloom. "Quickly now, quickly and quietly," he warned. He followed Josh into the opening and pulled the shelves closed behind him, just as the cellar door turned into a foul black liquid and flowed down the stairs with the most appalling stench of sulphur. "Up, Nicholas! Up!" Nick Fleming's voice was warm against Josh's ear. This comes out in the empty shop next to ours. We have to hurry. It'll take Dee only a few moments to realize what happened." Josh Newman nodded. He knew the shop. The dry cleaners had been empty all summer. He had 100 questions, and none of the answers that ran through his mind were satisfactory, since most of them contained that one awful word in them: magic. He had just watched two men toss balls and spears of something of energy at each other. He had witnessed the destruction of those energies that it had caused. Josh had just witnessed magic, but of course everyone knew that magic simply did not exist. Alright, that's the end of chapter 2. I think I'll leave it there. I must say it's more significantly more difficult to read efficiently, coherently, when I've got the microphone sitting right there. And strangely enough, whispering like this is actually really hard on my throat. I had to stop multiple times to clear my throat because it just seems to like fill up and get all clogged up for some reason. But you know, I guess you live and learn, and I guess I have to figure out this for myself, I guess. But yeah, we'll leave it at that for now. And if I guess I'll make another video soon and carry on from where we left off. But until then, thanks for watching.